UN Secretary General António Guterres is calling for a demilitarized zone at a nuclear plant in Ukraine where continued shelling is raising concerns. But Russia, which controls the area around the site, is rejecting those calls. Moscow says that its forces are there to prevent what it called a Chernobyl scenario. Charlie Nagata is in Ukraine with more. Charlie, good morning.
Good morning to you, Anne-Marie. We are at the Hostomel airfield just north of Kyiv. It proved to be one of the decisive battles for Ukrainian forces early on in the war. But today another fight is underway as the battle of a nuclear power plant is pushed to the brink. Both sides issue ominous warnings of an attack today. Ukrainian officials say Russia plans to stage a false flag incident at Europe's largest nuclear power plant and blame Ukraine, just hours after Russia accused Ukraine of trying to stage an accident there. The threats are timed to coincide with a visit to the country by Turkish President Tayyip Erdogan and UN Chief António Guterres.
The area needs to be demilitarized, and we must tell it as it is. Any potential damage to Zaporizhia is suicide.
President Zelensky demanding an immediate and unconditional withdrawal. Russia must stop all provocations and certainly all shelling, he said. We cannot allow Russia to deliberately put us all on the edge of a radiation catastrophe. Ukraine accuses Russia of using it as a military base for troops and equipment. Shaky social media video appears to show Russian military vehicles parked inside the complex. Russian forces captured the plant in the early days of the war, but in the past 2 weeks, it's come under sustained shelling as fighting intensifies in the southeast. While there has been no let-up in Russia's relentless missile strikes on eastern cities like Kharkiv, where officials say at least 19 have died and dozens more have been wounded in 2 days of heavy bombardment. The Russian government has already rejected a UN proposal to demilitarize the plant and the area around it, calling it unacceptable, saying a withdrawal of forces would make it even more vulnerable. Anne-Marie?
Listen, Charlie, I got to ask you, increasingly Erdogan of Turkey has kind of found himself in the middle of these two opposing forces. He hasn't found himself there. He's put himself there, right? So certainly Turkey has been at the center of negotiations about grain ships and other things. Erdogan met with Putin just a couple of weeks ago, and there was this sort of joint statement released about how they're going to sort of enhance their cooperation on a number of fronts, including terrorism and trade and all this sort of stuff. I just am starting to wonder, for how long can Erdogan sort of play the middle here? And I guess, what's his angle?
Well, I mean, the Turkish president finds himself by dint of geography, by location, being part of the middle of what's going on, partly because the grain has to be shipped through Turkey. That needs to have a level of cooperation. But yes, he sees himself as a sort of moderator, if you will, if you could even describe it as that sort of role between President Zelensky and President Putin. He certainly has the ear of both leaders. Now, if you want to know how it's really gone down here, President Zelensky said in no uncertain terms, there is no sense talking peace as long as Russia is firing their weapons. If they want to stop that, then we'll move forward. Grain is a massive step forward. It shows the level of cooperation. It's going to serve the world. It's going to serve this country in terms of resources. And it shows that there is an open door to cooperation. But the Turkish president, he has an ear in both camps. He has a foot in both camps. It may be that he's come to the table. He's certainly presenting himself as somebody who can move forward with progress. But, this meeting that we saw here in Ukraine, it was great that we saw the UN Secretary General and the Turkish President Zelensky was there. Certainly Russia wasn't at the table.
Exactly. Before we let you go, though, I got to ask you about where you're at right now. You say that this is a site of a decisive victory for Ukraine early on. It's pretty dramatic scene back there.
Sure, we can. We came here today. This is about an hour and a half north of the Capitol because, next week marks 6 months since the invasion began. And this is a critical turning point. If you remember back then, the Russians were trying to take this airfield. They had put in paratroopers, and only a handful, not many more than a handful of Ukrainian soldiers were here trying to stop them from taking that. How much different this conflict would have been if the Russians had been able to secure this as a forward operating base just outside the Capitol. 3 days of ferocious fighting, and I mean ferocious fighting, got underway, and the Ukrainians were able to stop the Russians from taking a toehold or foothold at this airfield. So they needed to get everything through from land, and that's why you saw that 40-mile convoy that had to be moved in. If this had been taken by Russian forces, it might have changed the course of the conflict, certainly in the early days of the war. And the destruction, that's just a hint of it. You should see the destruction all around this airfield. It really shows the scars of the battle that took place here.
Right. Charlie D'Agata, thank you very much.